If he was to maintain control of the scene, he would need Dwyer's cooperation. "Will you please come to Mr. Doherty's apartment immediately?" Burns said over the phone. "Something terrible has happened." Dwyer soon appeared outside the apartment in his dressing gown and slippers. Before the manager had a chance to press the buzzer, Burns opened the door and motioned Dwyer inside. Burns didn't need to explain anything. He simply led the manager to the crime scene. The delicacy of the situation must not have immediately impressed itself upon Dwyer. "I'd better call Dr. Schoenfeld," he said, referring to the Wardman Park's house doctor. "No," Burns snapped. "That can wait." Instead, Burns picked up the telephone and asked the operator for the White House. It was not yet 7 in the morning, so there was some delay before the president finally came on the line. "This is Burns of the Bureau of Investigation, Mr. President. I'm deeply sorry to bother you at such an hour, but there is dreadful news, and I wanted you to be the first to hear it." Harding demanded that Burns spit it out. "Jesse Smith has committed suicide." The line went silent. "That's terrible, Mr. Burns," Harding finally said. "Simply terrible." As Dwyer listened on, the president urged secrecy until he had a chance to break the news to Doherty personally. Harding also suggested that Lieutenant Commander Joel T. Boone, a Navy physician seconded to the White House, be ordered to the scene. And so it was that the president's personal doctor, rather than the District of Columbia coroner, made the first medical examination of Jess Smith's body. Boone immediately declared Smith dead, a self-evident conclusion, and just as quickly judged the cause to suicide, a less obvious one. Only after Burns had searched the room and Boone had inspected the body were other investigators admitted to the crime scene. Dwyer summoned the Wardman Park's house detective, named, in an incredible coincidence, Harry J. Doherty, who in turn alerted police at the local Tenleytown sub-precinct. When officers finally arrived, followed by Coroner J. Ramsey Nevitt, no one dared to remark that the revolver had gone missing. Burns apparently misplaced it. But he was not a man to trifle with, even if he was tampering with a crime scene. One detail could not escape notice, however. How, Patrolman L.R. Keach asked, could a man shoot himself and then get his head in the basket? The officer's question was never answered. Lording over the crime scene, the director of the Bureau of Investigation discouraged a thorough search of the forensic evidence. Instead, Burns offered up a compelling narrative of suicide for the D.C. authorities. He and Smith had been socially acquainted, and Smith, he reported, had suffered from chronic diabetes. Boone, who had treated Smith himself on occasion, and knew that a wound from his recent appendectomy had never quite healed, backed up Burns's conclusion, ascribing the act to brooding over his physical condition. Coroner Nevitt knelt down next to the body, noted the powder burns around the entry wound, and dutifully signed a certificate of suicide. Later, all these details and unanswered questions would arouse much suspicion within Washington. Lawmakers would wonder aloud why the coroner failed to order an autopsy. Journalists would ask how Doherty, who as a cabinet officer earned $12,000 a year, and Smith, who drew no government salary, could afford their lavish lifestyle at the Wardman Park, with annual household expenses exceeding $50,000. They would question how Smith, a man deathly afraid of firearms, could have ever handled a revolver, let alone held it to his right temple and pulled the trigger. And they would puzzle over how the federal government's top investigator, America's most famous detective, could somehow misplace the key to the crime scene, the suicide weapon. Washington would soon discover that these questions, intriguing as they were, only scratched the surface.